In a bold and tense moment, Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen rejects calls to lower interest rates, a move many believe is aimed at undermining President Trump's economic agenda. But New York State Assemblyman Zohran Mamdani doesn't stay silent. What follows is a fiery exchange that shocks the room and turns the tide. This unforgettable political standoff is setting the internet ablaze. The air inside the congressional chamber was thick, not with words, but with silence. President Trump had just left the room after making an emotional, heartfelt plea to Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen. Trump had begged her, pleaded to lower interest rates so everyday Americans could breathe again. The cameras caught it all. "Do it for the people," Trump had said. "This isn't about politics, it's about pain." But Yellen didn't budge. She stood there, calm, cold, calculating. Then she said it loud enough for every reporter to catch. "Maybe the tariffs are the problem, not the rates." A gasp moved through the crowd like a wave. That sentence hit like a slap. It wasn't just a policy disagreement. It was personal, aimed directly at Trump. Assemblyman Zohran Mamdani, seated just a few feet away, clenched his jaw. He didn't move yet. Not yet. He waited. Let the moment sting. Then Yellen added one more line that shattered everything. "We're not here to fix the president's mistakes." And that's when Zohran Mamdani slowly stood. The silence returned, but this time it carried the weight of something deadly serious. Something was about to erupt. Mamdani didn't speak right away. He simply looked at Yellen, a stare so cold, so piercing, even the camera operators paused. There was something unshakably calm about him, but underneath that calm was fire. He reached for the mic. Reporters leaned forward. Every senator froze. "You said," Mamdani began slowly, "that you are not here to fix the president's mistakes. So let me ask you, Secretary Yellen," he stepped forward, voice low but firm, "who exactly are you here to help?" The room went still. Mamdani's voice got sharper. "Because right now, families can't buy homes. Veterans are drowning in credit card debt. Small businesses are collapsing like dominoes. And you, with your $300,000 salary and a chauffeured black SUV, you sit there and say, nothing will change." Yellen started to shift uncomfortably. Mamdani pressed in. "Tell me, Secretary Yellen, when you cut rates 3 times under Joe Biden, was that for the people? Or was that because the cameras weren't rolling and your friends on Wall Street asked nicely?" The words hit like a hammer. Yellen didn't respond, and for the first time in years, she looked rattled. Zohran Mamdani had just landed the first blow, and he wasn't finished. "Let me remind you of something, Secretary Yellen," Mamdani said, now fully facing the nation through the camera lens. "You burned through $3 billion this year. $3 billion with a B." Yellen sat frozen. "But what's even worse," Mamdani continued, "is that you approved a $2.5 billion budget, not for Americans, not for housing relief, not for student debt, but to renovate the Treasury building." Gasps, audible gasps. "You mean to tell us," Mamdani thundered, "that while families are choosing between rent and groceries, you thought now was the right time to put Italian marble in your executive bathroom?" Some senators buried their faces in their hands. Aide after aide started frantically checking their phones. The media outside had already begun running the headline. Zohran Mamdani accuses Yellen of $2 embezzlement in live congressional showdown. Yellen finally tried to interrupt, her voice shaking. "Those funds were..." But Mamdani cut her off, sharp and clear. "Save it. You're not an economist anymore. You're a corrupt politician in disguise." The room erupted in murmurs. Chairs shuffled, staff whispered, and Yellen, she sat there in complete humiliation. And Mamdani, he hadn't even used his strongest card yet. Zohran Mamdani turned his head slightly, locking eyes with a disabled construction worker sitting behind the chamber gallery. "Secretary Yellen," Mamdani said, his voice trembling with a controlled emotion. "Do you see that man back there?" Everyone turned. He immigrated to this country in the 90s, worked 3 jobs to put his kids through school, lost his leg in an industrial accident, and started a small hardware business. Now he's bankrupt. Not because he made bad choices, but because of your choices. Mamdani paused, letting it sink in. His mortgage jumped. His equipment loan rates skyrocketed. He told me just this morning, I built my whole life here, but now I'm losing everything because I can't afford to stay. Yellen lowered her gaze. You call this economic strategy? Mamdani pressed. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like the targeted sabotage. A tear slipped from the worker's eye. He asked me to tell you something, Secretary Yellen, Zohran said, holding up a folded piece of paper. He wrote, if you are not going to help us, at least stop hurting us. Gasps swept through the room again. The silence was no longer respectful. It was sharp, like the quiet before thunder, and the storm wasn't over. Zohran Mamdani was just getting started. Just when the room had gone heavy with heartbreak, Janet Yellen smirked. It wasn't big, it wasn't loud, but Mamdani saw it and so did the cameras. That smirk broke something in the room, something sacred. Mamdani stepped closer to the desk where Yellen sat, calm but with the energy of a coming earthquake. You find that funny? Mamdani asked, the microphone picking up the intensity in his voice. Yellen adjusted her collar, trying to appear composed. I respect the Assemblyman's concerns, but monetary policy can't be dictated by emotion or political theatrics. Mamdani's eyes narrowed. You call the suffering of Americans theatrics? You call a man losing his home a performance? No, of course not. Then don't smile when people cry. The chamber froze. It was no longer politics. This was now personal. Then Zohran said something that shifted the entire energy in the room. You might be sitting in that chair now, Secretary Yellen, but when the truth hits the people outside these walls, when they see who you really are, that chair won't protect you anymore. Yellen's smirk vanished. Zohran Mamdani had just issued a warning, and America was listening. Mamdani opened a black folder. Since you care about facts, he said, his voice slicing through the tension, let me give you one. He pulled out a printed sheet. This is an internal email from your office dated 6 months ago. Subject line, delay all rate changes until post-election quarter. Murmurs exploded in the chamber. Mamdani held the paper up. It's real, and it's signed by your deputy, who, by the way, donated $82,000 to anti-Trump super PACs in the last year alone. Yellen's face drained of color. Mamdani turned toward the senators. This isn't economic strategy. This is political warfare, and the victims, the single moms, the veterans, the truckers, the teachers, they're all drowning under your interest rate freeze. One Democratic senator tried to interrupt. Assemblyman Mamdani, that document could be misinterpreted. No, Mamdani said firmly, slamming the folder shut. What's been misinterpreted is Janet Yellen's loyalty to the American people. He looked directly at Yellen again. You cut rates for Biden. Now you freeze them for Trump. That's not just suspicious. That's treasonous in spirit. The word treason echoed like thunder. Yellen sat like stone, silent, shaken. And Mamdani, he wasn't done uncovering the rot, not even close. Zohran Mamdani flipped to a new page in his folder. Let's talk about numbers, Secretary Yellen, he said, his voice now colder. This year alone, the Treasury burned through $3 billion in taxpayer funds. And for what? He paused, then slowly lifted a photo and held it up. It was a glossy image of the Treasury building's marble lobby, golden railings, a new chandelier, lavish velvet carpeting. This is where your priorities lie. While Americans are being evicted and can't even afford a down payment, you're redesigning your office suite. Yellen tried to interject. These expenses were pre-approved. Mamdani raised a hand. No, they were buried, hidden under technical language and obscure line items. But the truth always comes out. The room was growing tenser by the second. Even some Democrat senators had gone quiet. Mamdani leaned into the mic. You budgeted $2.5 billion for renovations. Not infrastructure, not community lending. Just your palace. He turned and looked toward the crowd in the gallery. How many of you can even afford a one-bedroom in D.C. right now? A mother in the back held her sleeping child tighter. And in that moment, my Mamdani wasn't just speaking as an assemblyman. He was speaking for all of them. Zohran Mamdani took a breath and lowered his voice. Let's go back to 2023, he said calmly, the final year of Biden's presidency. He pulled out a chart. Under Biden, Secretary Yellen lowered interest rates 3 separate times, claiming it was necessary to stimulate the economy. Yet today, in the middle of a housing crisis, you refuse to lower them even once under President Trump. Mamdani looked Yellen in the eye. "This isn't economics, it's vengeance." Murmurs swept through the chamber again. Mamdani stepped away from the podium and walked directly toward a large digital screen, pointing at a chart labeled Rate Cuts 2023 versus 2025. Side by side, the data was irrefutable. Then Mamdani turned toward the crowd. "This woman," he said, motioning to Yellen, "plays favorites with people's futures." He tapped the screen. 3 cuts for Biden, 0 for Trump. Same inflation, same economy, same people suffering. So what changed? Silence. Mamdani answered himself. Only one thing, the person in the Oval Office. And with that, he looked into the lens of the C-SPAN camera broadcasting live. Secretary Yellen has chosen her side, but the American people, they didn't choose this pain. Even Yellen knew then, the narrative had flipped and she was losing it. Zohran Mamdani returned to the microphone, his voice lower now, almost shaking. "There's something I haven't told this chamber," he said softly. "Something I've kept to myself." He reached into his inside pocket and pulled out a crumpled handwritten note. "This is from my cousin Samira." He looked up, eyes glistening. She's a single mother from Jackson Heights, worked 2 jobs. She saved up for 5 years to buy her first home. When she finally found one, the bank told her the interest rate had made it impossible. He stopped, swallowed hard. She broke down crying in the parking lot. She called me that night, said, "Zohran, I did everything right. Why does it still feel like I'm being punished?" Mamdani read, holding the note higher. "She died 6 weeks later in a car crash. Never got her home. Never saw her dream come true." Zohran's voice cracked. "And every time I see Secretary Yellen smirk or spin data like it's just math on paper, I remember her and I remember millions of others like her." The room was dead silent. Some were wiping away tears. Even camera operators were choking up. And Yellen, she didn't dare move because Zohran Mamdani had just broken every heart in the room. The walls felt like they were closing in. Mamdani stood silent for a moment, letting the weight of Samira's story settle over the chamber. Even the sharpest critics on the panel looked down, their scripts forgotten. Then Mamdani raised his eyes and his voice. "Secretary Yellen, I'll ask again, not just as an assemblyman, but as a son of immigrants and a New Yorker who serves this country. Who are you working for?" Yellen blinked. "I work for the American people." Zohran stepped forward. "Then why does Wall Street cheer when you speak, but working-class Americans cry?" He held up another sheet. "This is a transcript from a private meeting you had just 2 weeks ago with a group of hedge fund managers, all of whom are betting on interest rates staying high. You told them, and I quote, 'Don't worry, no cuts anytime soon.' There was no denying it. The room knew it." Mamdani leaned forward one last time. "You didn't just betray a president. You betrayed the people." The camera zoomed in on Yellen's hands. They were trembling. Zohran Mamdani turned from Yellen and faced the audience again. "I spoke with a woman named Priya last night," he began, his voice steady but soft. "She owns a flower shop in Queens. Her mother started it in 1973. For decades, they helped celebrate life's moments in that community. One bouquet, one family, one local hire at a time." He paused. 2 weeks ago, Priya closed her doors for good. The audience gasped. Interest rates crushed her supply chain. Loans dried up. Her last order, flowers for a local memorial service, got canceled. The pastor called her crying. Zohran's voice cracked again. They couldn't even properly honor a beloved community elder. Senators whispered in disbelief. "You want to talk policy, Secretary Yellen?" Mamdani snapped. "Let's talk reality. While you're eating steak behind your office walls, families in Queens were praying for their small businesses not to shut down." He slammed a fist on the table, and the echo of it rolled through the room like thunder. "These people aren't just numbers on a spreadsheet. They are America, and you've broken them." A woman in the gallery began crying openly. Yellen stared blankly ahead, and Zohran Mamdani stood taller than ever. Mamdani paused, took a long breath, and looked directly at Yellen again, but this time not with anger, with sadness. "This wasn't always you," he said quietly. The room leaned in. I've read your old work. I know you once believed in restoring faith in this institution. You wrote essays about making the Treasury more transparent. You talked about serving Main Street, not just Wall Street. Yellen didn't speak. Her lips tightened. But somewhere along the line, you changed. You traded in service for status, duty for deals. And now, Secretary Yellen, you've become exactly what you once warned against. Zohran walked toward the center of the chamber, his voice barely above a whisper. You've become the danger. The words hit hard. They didn't scream, they bled. You were supposed to protect Americans, Mamdani said, but now they need protection from you. A full minute of silence followed. Even the press gallery put down their phones. Yellen looked down, and the nation watching live was beginning to understand. This wasn't just a political clash. It was a reckoning, and Zohran Mamdani was leading it. Mamdani stepped away from the podium and pointed at a map projected on the screen behind him. Tiny red dots began to appear. Dozens of them. Each of these dots, he said softly, represents a small town that has lost its only bank branch in the last 6 months. The room went silent again. Places like Ellenville, New York, Bessemer, Alabama, Emporia, Kansas. You probably haven't heard of them, Secretary Yellen, but families there can't get loans. Farmers can't refinance. Small business owners can't expand, all because of your refusal to bring interest rates down. He zoomed in on one dot. This one's Jackson Heights, Queens, where I grew up. He turned around slowly. My aunt still lives there. Last week, her roof was damaged in a storm. The bank denied her a $5,000 repair loan, said the interest payments would be too risky. Zohran's voice shook. She's 71. She's been covering the leak with a tarp. Gasps. And you sit here and say the economy is stable? Mamdani pointed one last time at the sea of red dots. It's not stable, it's shattered. And that map, burning bright behind him, was a wound no one could ignore. Zohran Mamdani flipped to a new folder. This, he said with quiet thunder, is a list of private meetings you've held since January. He clicked the screen again. Names popped up: BlackRock, Goldman Sachs, Vanguard, Soros Fund Management. He waited. You met with billionaire investors 42 times this year alone. He took another step closer to Yellen. Want to know how many times you met with small business associations or middle-class homeowner groups? He raised his voice slightly. 0. Someone in the gallery let out a sharp gasp. A few senators shifted uncomfortably. Yellen began to speak. Those meetings were private, strategic, Mamdani interrupted. I'm sure they were. He pulled another sheet from the folder. This email from one of your assistants literally says, avoid public optics, maintain quiet coordination with top fund managers on rate strategy. He tossed the sheet onto the table in front of Yellen. You've sold out the people for power. You're not neutral, you're bought. A senator whispered to a colleague, this is bad. And Zohran Mamdani, he wasn't just exposing corruption, he was unmasking it with the entire nation watching. Mamdani looked out over the chamber one last time before turning back to Yellen. My sister is watching this right now, he said from her apartment in Queens, where her rent just went up $500 in the last year. Yellen didn't respond. She watched you testify on national TV 2 months ago. You said Americans are doing well, that inflation is easing. Zohran's voice cracked slightly. She laughed, then she cried. A hush fell over the room. She said, how can she say we're doing fine when I can't even afford groceries without skipping my medication? Mamdani stepped back toward the mic, holding steady. You lied to the country, and you lied to people like my sister, who trusted that someone in Washington still gave a damn. Her eyes burned now, not with rage, but pain. And when you lied, you didn't just hurt the economy, you broke trust. And trust is the one thing the American people have left. Zohran turned to the Senate gallery. Who here is willing to keep letting this woman break them? No one raised a hand. And Yellen finally looked down because she knew the damage was done. Zohran Mamdani stepped back from the microphone and folded his hands. His voice softened, but the emotion in his tone was heavier than ever. You know what hurts the most, Secretary Yellen, he said slowly. It's that we believed in you. He turned toward the gallery, then back to Yellen. When the economy collapsed years ago, People hoped the Treasury would protect them. They hoped you would protect them. But instead, you chose to protect your seat. He held up another photo, this time of a foreclosure sign in front of a modest home in Maryland. A child's bicycle sat untouched beside it. This house belonged to a nurse named Evelyn. Her husband left, and she fought like hell to keep that home, but the interest payments broke her. Zohran's voice cracked. She moved into her car with her 6-year-old son. Now you could hear sniffles from multiple corners of the chamber. Even a few senators lowered their heads. She still works at the hospital, Mamdani added, tears in his eyes. But now she showers in the staff locker room and pretends everything's fine. Then he whispered, "You gave up on people like her, and that is unforgivable." Yellen didn't even look up because the shame was now too heavy. The chamber was so quiet you could hear a cough from the third row of the gallery. Mamdani glanced out again and saw something that broke him. A young woman holding up a folded American flag, the kind given at a military funeral. Zohran's voice dropped. "What's your name?" he asked gently. The woman stood. "Layla, sir. My husband was Staff Sergeant Morales." Zohran nodded slowly. "He passed recently?" Layla nodded. "He lost his home, PTSD. They said he couldn't take the pressure anymore." A long pause followed. Then Mamdani turned back to Yellen. "You didn't just push people to the edge. You pushed them over it." He stepped forward. "And while you were signing off billion-dollar luxury upgrades for your lobby, men like Sergeant Morales were choosing between medicine and rent." The flag shook in Layla's hands. Mamdani took a breath and then delivered the final blow. "You're not the head of a treasury. You're the architect of a quiet war on the middle class." People in the gallery began crying. A woman fainted in her seat. Yellen looked like a person whose mask had fallen off. There was no defense left, only truth. Zohran Mamdani gripped the edge of the podium with both hands. He stared directly at Yellen, not as a politician now, but as someone who had seen the cost of failed leadership. "Let me make something clear," Zohran said. "I'm not here to beg you," he paused, letting that sink in. "I'm not here to negotiate with someone who has already made up their mind. I'm here to show this country who you really are." He pointed again toward the crowd. "I'm here for the fisherman in Montauk who lost his boat because his variable rate loan doubled. I'm here for the teacher in Georgia whose student loans swallowed her life. I'm here for the waitress who told me last week she sleeps in her car, works 2 jobs, and still can't afford an apartment. And I'm here for the mothers crying in silence, and the fathers who feel like failures." Zohran's voice rose one last time. "You may sit in the tallest tower in finance, but today in this chamber, I stand taller than you." The entire room stood. Yellen couldn't even lift her head, because this was Judgment Day. Zohran Mamdani turned toward the large monitor behind him and clicked a button. The screen lit up with a detailed photo of the Treasury building surrounded by scaffolding, luxury black SUVs parked in front, and a row of workers wheeling in imported marble slabs. "Take a good look," Zohran said, pointing to the image. "This is where $2.5 billion of your money went." Another click. The next photo zoomed in. Italian chandeliers, gold-trimmed staircases, even a new executive dining hall with private wine lockers. "This wasn't just a renovation," Mamdani continued. "This was robbery dressed as maintenance." He turned back to Yellen. "And while you were laying gold tiles in your office, millions of Americans were laying eviction notices on their kitchen counters." Someone in the crowd shouted, "You thief!" Zohran didn't stop. "You said this building needed to be modernized for security, but let me ask you, what kind of security do hungry families have when they lose their homes?" There was no answer. And then Zohran dropped it. "This isn't the Treasury anymore. It's the Treasury Resort, and you're its queen." The chamber erupted. Yellen's face turned ghost white, and Zohran Mamdani, he just kept climbing. Just as Mamdani returned to the podium, a sudden ripple moved across the Senate floor. A woman in a gray blazer, one of Yellen's senior staffers, leaned in and whispered something in her ear. Yellen's eyes widened. "No," she mouthed, "not now." But it was too late. The woman slid a sealed folder onto the table in front of her, then quietly stepped away. Zohran watched, sharp as a hawk. "What was that?" he asked. Yellen didn't answer. She looked shaken more than before. Zohran walked forward again. "You don't want to tell us? Then I'll do it for you." He reached beneath his own stack of documents and pulled out a matching folder marked Confidential, Internal Treasury Expenditure Logs. "Your own aide gave this to my office at 6:12 a.m. this morning," Zohran said. He held up a highlighted line. Line item 447, Entertainment and VIP Lounge. Additional $6.2 million allocated from contingency relief funds. A wave of disbelief flooded the room. "You used emergency taxpayer money to build yourself a private cocktail bar while people are skipping dinner to pay rent." Gasps, outrage, audible crying. Yellen was visibly sweating. Janet Yellen tried to compose herself, but her voice cracked as she reached for the microphone. "I don't recognize that document," she stammered. Zohran Mamdani didn't blink. "Then let's read the footnote, shall we?" He tapped the screen behind him, zooming in on a signature at the bottom. Janet L. Yellen, handwritten. The air got sucked out of the room. Even Yellen stared at it, stunned. "You signed it," Zohran said. "You approved it. You buried it." He turned to the Senate gallery. "Now tell me, is this woman still fit to lead the Treasury?" Murmurs turned into uproar. Someone yelled, "Resign!" Another, "Investigate her!" Yellen reached for her water, spilling it slightly. Her fingers twitched. Her necklace sat uneven. And then she whispered something under her breath. Zohran caught it. "What did you say?" Yellen looked up, eyes red. "I thought no one would ever find out." Silence. It was over, not because of a vote, but because the mask had fallen completely. The world saw a person, not a leader. And Zohran Mamdani stood across from her, calm, steady, unbreakable. Zohran Mamdani stepped to the center of the room. Every camera in America now locked on him. "Secretary Yellen," he said slowly, "you've taken billions, dodged every warning, blamed everyone but yourself, and today, finally you were exposed." He turned, addressing the entire Senate. "Now this country is broken, not because of a storm or a war, but because the very people sworn to protect the economy chose to profit from its pain." He looked back at Yellen, pale, silent, completely deflated. "You don't just owe an apology to President Trump," Zohran said, his voice firm. "You owe one to every parent who's lost sleep, every child who's gone hungry, every family who's watched their dreams fall apart. One interest payment at a time." He raised his voice, not in anger, but in conviction. "Apologize to America." Yellen didn't respond, so Zohran faced the chamber and finished the sentence himself. "Because no luxury bar, no marble lobby, and no DC power game, it is worth the soul of a nation." A long pause, then a standing ovation from senators, from veterans, from ordinary people in the back rows, and the internet was already ablaze. If this story moved your heart, if Zohran Mamdani earned your respect today, then hit that like button, subscribe for more true emotional political stories, and drop a comment with your thoughts. Tell us which moment hit you the hardest. And don't forget to join our channel membership to unlock behind-the-scenes content. Thank you for standing with the truth. And as always, God bless you and God bless America.